Thanks everyone for tuning in to the next episode of the AI Adoption Playbook. I'm here with Diamond from Datadog. Diamond, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Diamond. I'm the Director of Engineering and AI at Datadog, running our AI agents efforts. Previous to this, I was running a little startup that was focusing on AI SRE and DevOps work that got brought into Datadog over the last year or so. And before that, I've run AI products for the last 15 years across Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and more.
Cool. Congratulations. Well, I think one of the things that I always like to start with for people who are talking about agents is, what is an agent, right? I feel like there are so many different versions of the answer to this question. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think of it kind of like the older definition. You know, if you've kind of been in AI for a long time, the early machine learning definition was probably tied more to the robotics aspect, an ability to actually observe and act on the world. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of what I think of here too, is the ability to observe, act, and react. It's more than just a workflow. Yep. Agents are being used across the board as a phrase that people kind of bring up for chatbots, workflows, variety of things like that. Yep. I don't think it's a real agent until you can actually take an action and it can make a choice to not do a particular part of the workflow or to observe and do something else. Right. And it's very simple in the beginning. Like much of that can just be, it's a for loop that has an ability to make a tool call, right? That's reasonable. But it shouldn't be like I have exact steps programmed into it that it has to do every time. Right.
I think that roughly aligns with the sort of Harrison from Langchain's definition of like an AI is an agent if it is in control of the control flow of the application. Like the LLM is in charge of the control flow of the application.
Yeah, it can make some choices along the way. Cool. And it's more than a workflow and more than a rules-based kind of step-by-step interaction. I think Harrison's probably right there.
Okay, interesting. So that doesn't necessitate like the ability to take actions, right? A chatbot could be an agent as long as it's like decision about where down the various sort of routes of the chatbot it should go.
I guess that's where it becomes fuzzy. It depends on what you define as an action, right?
Right.
Because an action can be like a dialogue type action where it's like, hey, I want to go gather some more data. Yep. Or it could be, I want to gather a certain particular piece of information. Like you may be hearing this agentic RAG kind of phrase. Yeah. I don't know if I agree with the phrase, but I can see where they're coming from in terms of it's a choice to go and gather more data rather than I pulled it once, I'm done. Yep. It's like, hey, I can look at it, I can observe what I got back, and I can make a choice to use the tool. The tool in this case might be another search.
Cool. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. So I'm curious, just at a high level, about like, why are agents interesting to you? Like, obviously this is just another new technology in a long line of new technologies. And yet, despite that, agents seem to have captured the imagination and have, obviously caught fire on like X and social media and such. But I think more than that, practically speaking, I just hear so many people at enterprises who are in fact trying to build agents. What is it about this technology that's so exciting and is so urgent that so many enterprises are trying to adopt it so fast?
I'm someone who's kind of been working with AI assistants for probably 15-ish years. Yeah, there aren't probably a ton of people who've been doing that. One of the early ones I worked on was Cortana for the Windows Phone. That's how long ago it was. But I think the thing that people used to get excited about for assistants was it can do something for me, right? It can take this action. Mm-hmm. And then they became disillusioned when it really couldn't, right? Because the tech wasn't quite right. So I think it's this promise of being able to take action again that the agents are, even though it's not necessarily the only part of the definition that matters. Yep. It is the part of it that really gets people excited. And from an enterprise point of view, a lot of that is, hey, I have a lot of people who do a lot of work that I think some of that could probably be, automated. Yep. I think some of that could be actions that you can take, and it's more than just getting them info faster. It's actually doing something that is a job to be done that you're completing, that a person doesn't have to anymore.
Right. Totally makes sense. And so how much of that do you think is, like, how much of the value of agents do you think is fundamentally lives in doing things that now a person doesn't have to do anymore versus like discovery of like new things that, people weren't necessarily doing before anyway?
For enterprise, I think most of it is doing something right now. Right. That's kind of probably the first layer of that pillar that we're going to work up. Right. Doing something people are doing today. Right. I think that that's different than like research. Some of these like research agents that different folks are exploring is about finding maybe novel information or putting together data in a different way that you might have before. But I don't think that's what enterprises are paying for right now. I think what they really want is they want to say, I need 2 people instead of 8. Yeah. That kind of thing.
And, it's interesting. You say what enterprises are paying for right now. Are you seeing examples of agents at Datadog where, you're getting significant real value out of it today and it's like deployed in production?
We're starting to. It's still early. The type of agents that we're working on at Datadog are, if you take a step back to what does Datadog do? Datadog really is there to observe and help you operate your system.
Makes sense.
That's the DevSecOps of what we do, right?
Really cool.
Security, DevOps, all the above. And it's more than just observability nowadays. It's also like, how do you actually build a system that works well over time and can keep being improved and is secure and all of that?
Yeah.
And that means that we're building agents that kind of work across each of those jobs that people do on Datadog. So one of them is an incident goes off. And many of you, myself included, I've woken up at 2 a.m. for an alert going off for AWS or for like early days of Alexa. I was working on that product a while ago, and we had things go wrong all the time because we were scaling up like crazy in the beginning. And you just follow a runbook a lot of times in the beginning. You're just kind of trying to get your wits about you, trying to gather data. So we have an agent that is under our Bits AI initiative, which is the assistant for Datadog, that is basically there to look at your runbooks, query your logs, traces, metrics, all the stuff we have in Datadog, and try to get ahead of you before you even have to wake up or before you even have to get to your computer.
Really cool.
And that's just a very clear pain point that if we do it well, and we're still in a private preview for that right now, it's improving every day. If we do it really well, people can keep sleeping and let the agent handle their issues for them, except if there's a very anomalous case. Right.
Sure.
And there's a variety of other agents we're doing as we kind of walk down that broad set of things that people use Datadog for.
So do you have example incidents that you have resolved for your private preview customers yet?
Not full resolution yet, because there is still this question of maybe worth talking about of like, how do you earn the trust of engineers and customers? And we dog food this all the time, so we see it running as well. We purposely first are using the agent to gather data and try to find the root cause.
Makes total sense, yeah.
But we're not going to fix the root cause for you yet.
Got it.
We want to keep the human in the loop.
Got it.
So we do have a variety of cases now where Bits is able to actually go and find the root cause that was like a faulty deployment that went through, or there was a dependent service that was breaking your system. So it's not you, it's actually like there's a different service. And we save people time because by the time they get to their computer or they check their phone, the Datadog app on their phone, or check Slack, because we talk to them through Slack as well, they can see, oh, okay, that was a change downstream of me and we're going to roll that back and I'll go trigger that. Or they can see it's a dependent service and I can go check the dashboard and I can say, okay, I need to wait for OpenAI to come back up, whatever it is that's going on, without them having to spend the 20, 30 minutes, an hour, or whatever it is to actually go and debug that problem.
Really cool. Yeah. And I think that's a great point that you raised, which is how do you earn the trust, of the engineers and the customers? Like, I'm sure you would love to be able to go the extra mile and say, okay, well, we know it was like this commit that, we just deployed that caused the problem. Let's just revert that commit and redeploy. How do you get your customers to a point where they're comfortable that you should be able to do that, make that kind of decision agentically?
I think there are a few different parts of this. One of them is evaluation. We need to do a really good job with our own eval. This is something that a lot of people struggle with, ourselves included. It's very easy to build an agent that does something. It's very hard to know that it does it well. And then even harder to improve it and kind of hill climb against that data.
Totally makes sense.
So we spend a substantial amount of our time right now gathering data and using that data to basically test our agent across a variety of scenarios. And what the end goal there is to be able to tell customers, hey, this works really well for, here's the kind of precision recall trade-offs that we're making. Here's kind of the types of cases that it works really well, has maybe a 90% precision for like Kubernetes change deployment issues, or something like some variety of these things that it works well at, and that can help them know when they can trust it and when they might say, oh, this isn't quite working that well. And then from our side, that's kind of like the offline data aspect. There's also the runtime where we really work hard to find the right ways to only surface information that we think is correct. So this is a bit of the deciding how to tune your confidence values, deciding how you're going to actually make a call on whether or not what you're going to say is correct or not, and not trying to just bring everything to the human, because the human will get overwhelmed with all the sort of things you might have looked at.
Really, really interesting. You mentioned spending a lot of time gathering data, and I definitely hear that from a lot of folks. One of the things that I'm curious about here is like, obviously with AI, one of the things that's I think different about the generative world versus the predictive world is in the predictive world, you typically have a very just like concrete loss function, right? And your predictive algorithm like is predicting some variable, and then you can know exactly like what the distinction was between like what the prediction was and what the like correct answer was, right? Mm-hmm. And in the generative world, it's like much harder because let's say somebody asks like, you know, is this incident caused by this commit? There is actually like 100 correct answers to that, right? There's like yes, exclamation mark. There's like, it looks like it was correct. And it looks like it was caused by this. So you're sort of, there isn't necessarily a concrete quantified like correct value all the time. There can be like a generative AI can like come up with many different versions of something that's correct. And it's like much harder, I think, to get ground truth in this world than it was in the sort of traditional predictive world. I'm curious, how do you guys approach that? Does that problem even ring true for you? And if so, like, how do you approach solving it?
Certainly. I think of that as like, how do you actually measure the natural language generation versus the actions or information the system knows? And we focus a lot more on how do we turn that into something that is more quantifiable and care less a little bit about the surface form of that data. So in natural language generation, the surface form is kind of like the way you said your sentence, right? And you might have the semantic data underlying it that actually matters a lot more that the semantic data is correct to me than that the surface form seems reasonable. So for your example, like the yes or sure or maybe, mostly, maybe not maybe, but mostly should map to like yes or like correct. Some way to measure that. And then you should be able to kind of work backwards from like, was that correct or not? Like, can we actually take a sampling, get human labeling, and know if that was the correct response? And we might have a rubric that measures whether or not you were succinct, whether or not you added extraneous data, but like the real question is, were you correct or not in the end? And a very similar example of that is, or another direction you can go is you can do human alignment, which we think about too.
Interesting.
That's one of the approaches we've taken. I don't know if it's the best approach for all the types of agents, but for particular tasks, it's useful to look and see what did the human do in this case? And then run an agent against the exact same workflow or same interaction. For alerts and investigations, that might be go and look at what a human did to debug this problem. And let's go rerun it with our agent.
Interesting.
And then each step of the way, compare and say like, hey, do this pairwise comparison of like, how close were you to what the human did? That brings some problems with really all you care about is probably the final resolution or the final root cause that you found. So you don't really want to like downgrade an agent for not going and looking at something that didn't matter. But there's a couple different ways to do that.
Super interesting. Okay. You mentioned like human labeling, but you also mentioned kind of rubric. I'm curious if you guys are ever using like LLMs to judge these things, or if it is all like human in the loop at the moment for the evals or for the labeling. Like, how do you approach that stuff?
We actually use a lot of LLM-as-judge.
Cool. Interesting.
We find it works pretty well. We do a lot of 3-step or so processes. One of them is that you tend to generate the ground truths first with humans. For a lot of these use cases, or at least check the ground truth. And then you might rerun your agent as it gets improved and use an LLM judge on top of that to compare the outcome of what the LLM or agent did to what the original ground truth was. So that's one way to do this. The other part that we do to make sure this LLM as a judge is working well is we take a sampling of those cases of what the LLM as a judge did. And we then have a human annotate those,
Interesting.
And that'll give you your like human alignment score.
Cool.
To make sure that it's working well. Because if you just kind of give it a prompt and say like, go check to see if these are the same, you don't know if it actually does that well. You might need to make some improvements to get it closely aligned to how a human judge would say.
And I'm curious, like when you talk about making those improvements, I think this is another area that can often be quite different in generative AI versus traditional AI, because in traditional AI, typically, you're generating a bunch of data and you're like retraining the model, right? That's the like default thing to do. But in generative AI, it's less clear whether you even want to retrain the model, right? Do you is that something that you guys do? Do you mostly focus on prompting and like changing the sort of data pipelines that feed into the prompt? Like, what are you actually doing with these evals at the end of the day?
a variety of things depending on which agent. So some of our agents, much of the low-hanging fruit and improvements we need to make is either prompt engineering improvements, where you might go and say, here are the classes of issues that I'm hitting. Let me go see if I can alter the prompt a little bit, because it was kind of hacky. We just put this thing together. We're just trying things out right now. And then the next layer is like, if I'm a human and I look at this data, could I have figured it out?
Interesting.
And many times, maybe just the initial context is wrong. So it's that data pipeline you mentioned, the runtime data pipeline. And we need to tweak, what data is coming into the system. Easy to notice that sometimes you're just giving it the wrong data. So it's a garbage in, garbage out. You shouldn't be fine tuning anything at that point. And then sometimes it is related to that, but more the tools that you give the model. So I've actually found, we found a lot of what we've made improvements on over the last 6 months or so for many of our agents is improving the tools we provide. And some of those tools are more traditional model techniques. So you might actually give the LLM a tool that is, go and check to see if there's an anomaly in this data. And there's a bunch of ways to do that. You could just say, hey, here's a dashboard, go use a visual analysis. You could say, here's an actual tool that will go and run a prediction model, a classic prediction model, and come back with the result. And we've done that a lot with our Watchdog product.
Really cool.
So we do use tools that were used there. And then sometimes it's just that we didn't even give it the tool to get this info, and we need to go and do that. That tends to be all the things we do before we get to even thinking about things like fine-tuning. But we certainly look at fine-tuning as well, and we're doing that more and more over time in the future as we gather more data.
Really cool. When we talk about tools, obviously, the tool space is very, very busy and very, very active at the moment. Anthropic's MCP standard seems to be gaining a lot of popularity in the industry. Have you guys adopted the MCP standard for the tools that you guys are using, or are you using traditional API calls? If so, how did you choose on that architecture? How did you decide on that architecture, and why?
Yeah, we find MCP very interesting, and we are starting to adopt it. We worked on these agents before MCP came out. I think it came out November, December, and then people kind of ignored it, and then it came into the zeitgeist, and everyone was excited about it in March, right? If that timeline is correct. And we've talked to Anthropic a lot about some of the improvements they're making over time, and we're very bullish on it. So we are starting to move over tools that we've used, especially tools that we want to offer to external parties to the MCP standard, because that makes it easier for any other agent to use it.
What are some examples of those sorts of tools, and why does the MCP standard appeal for that?
So let's say you're using Cursor.
Yeah, great.
And you're a dev who has all your data on Datadog. You don't want to have to go over to Datadog while you're writing some code, maybe fixing your logs, maybe checking on some issue that came on, to go and gather the data you want. Maybe you want to quickly check a log for a particular service, and you can do that from Cursor itself.
Really cool.
And then use that as input into the code you're going to write to maybe write another log statement that looks a lot like the log that you're outputting here, or fix an error that you're seeing in our error tracker. And you can kind of combine that all into one place, where the agents that is running inside Cursor might be able to do that work. And very similar is we have customers who both use our agents and then are building their own custom agents that might use information from Datadog, information from their own custom logging solution, information from their own dashboards and tools, and combine that all to be able to observe their system appropriately and take action. And by offering them a MCP server, which is a layer on top of those APIs, they can take advantage of the things we've learned on how to call our own APIs, or logs, traces, metrics, everything. There's a couple hundred APIs that you could call, instead of them having to figure that out themselves every time.
Cool, interesting. And I'm curious, for these MCPs that you guys are shipping, are you shipping them to be run locally on the developer's computer? Are you adopting the sort of new streamable HTTP standards? Where are you sort of positioning Datadog's MCPs?
Yeah, it's very new, so none of this is available for anyone to pick up yet. But we're right now testing both solutions, because we think there are use cases where you might need both. We have some customers and some users even internally who want to just run a local MCP server with their Cursor solution.
Makes sense.
Because then they can tweak it, they can do whatever they want. Then we have some customers and some users that we expect are going to want a remote server. And that way they don't have to worry about running it. They can just think of it as this, off-box tool call that they make. And it's very little overhead for them.
What are the use cases for where remote makes more sense than the local thing?
I think a lot of that will be cases where you might have require a lot of data processing, or where you might require a lot of, call it low overhead on the current local box. So if you're running already something heavy on your own dev machine and you want to make an off-box call, that means you don't have to process everything on your own system.
Right.
The other assumption here is that with the remote calls, you can potentially plug a bunch of these MCPs in together and have them sit alongside each other, which is what Anthropic kind of, the way Anthropic thinks of it is that you can have many of these running together. Right. And if you don't have to run them all locally, you don't have that resource overhead to deal with.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. One of the things that I think, a lot of folks that I speak to are struggling with at the moment is just understanding from the entire universe of things that you can do with AI. And it just seems so broad, right? Like the number of use cases that you could go out and use, whether internally or in what you build, is so massive that it can be hard to just pick a place to start and choose something to actually get going with and to start realizing value from. How did you guys approach that at Datadog? I'm curious, both like for the internal operations side of things, like making your employees more effective, and then also in the universe of like, how do you make your product more valuable with these tools? Should you choose between one of these two options? Should you do both simultaneously? If so, how do you pick the right thing to do within each of those buckets? Curious, how it worked at Datadog.
In some sense, we're very lucky that we sell to and have customers that are very much like us.
Interesting.
The nice thing about devs selling to devs is that we dog food our product significantly.
Really cool.
And so a lot of the same pain points we feel are the pain points our customers feel.
Really cool.
Back to things like observing errors and fixing them, or dealing with on-call issues. These are all kind of the very high pain point issues that we feel as well.
Yep.
And we talk to our customers every day, and I think a lot of how we prioritized the initial set of agents we wanted to work on was seeing what's the thing customers keep asking for?
Yep, makes sense.
What are the jobs that they do with us the most every day? And do these align with our own use cases that we can dog food as well?
Right.
And we found that there were 2 or 3 use cases that were kind of popping to the top every time. One of them is, no one wants to wake up in the middle of the night, like I was saying.
Totally makes sense.
If you can do that well, people are like, yeah, let's do it. Like, if you can fix that for me, let's figure out the way to start getting there.
Right.
And all of our own engineers felt the same, of course. And so we really dug into that one. The other one was reducing the chance that you even get to this issue. So there are a lot of errors that come up throughout your system throughout the day that don't trigger an alarm.
Right.
A monitor doesn't go off.
Right.
But we observe these errors coming through all the time.
Interesting, yeah.
And we can fix many of them because we have things like GitHub integrations now. So we have another agent that will suggest code fixes for you.
Wow.
Before they become hopefully a large issue.
Right.
As part of our error tracking product.
Really
and that's another one that we really want to use internally. We're seeing code fixes coming out multiple times a day that we accept. And you can keep the human in the loop still.
Yep.
Because you give them a PR, they don't have to accept it.
Right.
And if it looks really good, it's easy. If it doesn't look good, that's fine. It didn't hurt anyone.
Right.
So those are the 2 kind of top ones. And then we're exploring the third one around security, because that's another large use case that we, a lot of signals come through that are security signals. There's usually many teams that kind of have to observe these things, and signals get dropped on the floor.
Right.
So being able to triage those and parse through them quickly seems like kind of an obvious use case for these tools.
Right.
But we're still early in that exploration.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And then in terms of the internal operations side of things, like are you, obviously I'm assuming you use more than Datadog, right, internally at Datadog. Obviously I'm sure you use a lot of Datadog, but I'm curious what the sort of internal employee productivity use cases are beyond sort of the ones that you're building into Datadog as a product.
The other big one is really just writing code every day, right?
Yeah.
We are pretty, heavily augmenting ourselves with these kind of tools. That's Cloud Code, that's Cursor. Yep. We're pretty happy using those every day. Cool. And then beyond that is just a lot of dogfooding our own product.
Yeah, interesting. How did you settle on Cloud Code and Cursor between like all of the different like products out there? I think Windsurf, obviously OpenAI have their own products as well in this space.
I wouldn't say we're settled yet.
Right.
We're willing to try anything out that looks promising that will help us get more done. I'd say like majority is Cursor right now.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who are big on Cloud Code. There's people who were using Copilot before. We were using a lot of Copilot.
Yep.
Copilot it's kind of funny that Cursor and other tools like that kind of overtook it. But they could come back into the game at some point in the future. I could see OpenAI's new, codecs and the like becoming something people like in the future too. But we're, just picking these tools up, trying them out, sharing them with each other.
Right.
And our CTO, Alexi, is very big proponent of like trying these things out and getting you to don't ignore the kind of current tools that are coming out, because if it works well, that's a huge improvement.
For sure. And I'm curious how it works at Datadog. Like, do you guys have like a centralized approach to this where, after a period of time, people have tried out Cursor, they've tried out Codex, they've tried out Claude Code. At some point, someone says, okay, let's buy Cursor for everyone or buy Claude Code for everyone or whatever? Or is it very decentralized? Individual teams can just like do whatever they want?
I'd say it's more centralized. It's not completely centralized.
Right.
Usually a team or someone from a particular team might put their hand up and say, hey, I'd really like to try this product.
Right.
Let's go do a trial.
Yeah.
And that trial usually starts with a smaller number of people. Because there's no reason for us to buy, 1,000 licenses or something if we don't get the value we want out of it. And then it usually turns into that thing of, okay, it worked well. Let's make it more centralized where we say, hey, Cursor's working well right now. Yep. Anyone who wants it can get a license.
Yep.
And that's the process we go through.
Really, really cool. How does it work with security and legal? I mean, I know that a lot of folks have a lot of challenges, working through those sorts of groups. How's it work at Datadog?
That's certainly I think that's the hard part for many of us is we want everything we're using to be secure and to make sure that it is a quality that meets our expectations to be able to work with any of our production systems. Yep. So that's why a lot of our trials sometimes will start with like not using our production code. Yep. But then we have our part of the trial process, and this is why it has to be centralized for how we actually do the final procurement. Right. Is that security and legal will take a pass through and poke around and make sure that it meets the expectations we have. Makes sense. There are certainly products that don't meet those expectations, and there are many products nowadays that they know how to sell to enterprise. SaaS selling to enterprise have become kind of commonplace enough that there are more than enough that meet all the high bars that we have for them. Yeah, it's been really cool, actually, I think, to see that transition in the industry overall. I think if you go back, not that long ago, when was Datadog founded? 2015, I think. 2015, right? So back in 2015, if you're a SaaS startup trying to sell to enterprises, if you're succeeding, you're like the only one, right? There's a very, very small number of SaaS players that are successfully selling to big public companies. But at this point, it's almost the default play. If you're a SaaS startup, it's like, well, if we're going to get big, we're going to have to be able to sell to enterprises. And so we may as well figure that out right from the beginning. And I think the ecosystem has got a lot more a lot better at helping SaaS startups do that, which I think is also really good for the enterprises as well, because it means you can buy tools like Cursor that didn't exist 3 years ago, right? But, your entire army of multiple thousand developers can be accelerated by the latest technology without having to wait for the 10-year cycle for Cursor to quote mature into being able to sell to the enterprise. I also do think enterprises have not lowered their bar, but changed their bar a little bit on this. I've sold to enterprise in the past for my startup and others where at one point, even pretty recently, people were like, my data goes to OpenAI? No. Right? Are you you need to ring fence a model sitting in my servers or else I cannot possibly do that. And I think that the last 2 years, a year at least, all of a sudden companies see, oh, this actually has a real impact. Yeah. I can't afford to not be in this game. Right. So I'm going to allow, zero data retention, everything like that, but I'm going to allow you to go and make calls to at least some providers that I'm okay with. Yeah. I mean, I think also, honestly, the foundation model providers did actually get a lot more mature. When we started Creedle, OpenAI would train on any data that you submitted to them, whether it was through the API or through the UI. And, we had to fight their legal and privacy teams pretty hard to get them to change that stance. Now, of course, I think, the industry just kind of coalesced around the fact that the enterprises were just not going to buy from OpenAI if that was the stance. And And it did, they did sort of respond to that with a much more enterprise-friendly security posture. So the combination of the enterprises kind of being clear about what was their kind of red lines, and then the foundation models have done a pretty good job. And I think we've been lucky in a way that the foundation model ecosystem has turned out to be extremely competitive. It was not obvious that was going to be the case in early 2023. Yep.
that developers would have all these choices. But all of a sudden now, Meta has obviously a huge offering. OpenAI obviously have a huge offering. Anthropic, Google, there are new startup players as well, like DeepSeek in China. And it's really, really hard for even a really successful player like OpenAI to dictate the terms of how an enterprise is going to use the technology. If anything, it's the enterprise dictating terms. One more question for you on the sort of organizational dynamics. I think one of the things that can be tricky with Gen AI is that everyone has an opinion, right? Everyone is using this in their personal lives. And so they have some idea or some opinion about what the best way or the best use case or the most valuable thing to do with it is. And so I'm curious, at Datadog, how do you guys work through collating all those opinions, making sure that you hear everyone, but not getting distracted and railroaded by the 5,001 opinions that you have from your 5,001 employees?
Certainly something we have to be careful about. Right. I think it's easy to have too many cooks in the kitchen for any of these types of products. Mm-hmm. A lot of the way we look at it is, I guess, similar to how we think about a lot of our product development, which is there tends to be an owner who is talking directly to customers.
Right, nice.
And they will take input from anyone who is a stakeholder interested in giving feedback, but it doesn't mean they need to block on that feedback.
Totally makes sense.
The thing that's most important for us is, do you move quickly to ship value to your customers?
Yeah.
And you cannot let anything else get in the way of that.
Right.
Except for, making sure you have the right compliance and the right bar for all the quality that you're shipping.
100%.
Everything else is, our customers want this thing.
Yep.
Let's go try it out.
Yep.
We're very open to many experiments fast.
Yep.
And then killing things that aren't working and putting more weight and people behind things that are working.
Yep.
So that we can ship something to production. We do a lot of small private previews with customers that are kind of lower bar for you don't need everyone's input on it because it's just a few customers trying it out.
Right.
And then as you see that work well and you kind of gain product market fit there, you expand it out to a more, hey, we're going to GA this thing. We're going to make it public. We're going to get a lot of people on. And then you get some more opinions, you get some more feedback.
Nice.
But you have customer proof points along with that.
Really cool. I'm curious, what's in your AI graveyard? The projects that you killed that didn't work out for whatever reason.
I don't know how many I can actually talk about. I will say that there are a wide variety of, maybe not quite graveyard, but a wide variety of things that we wanted to surface proactively to people. Mm-hmm. So we have this whole product space that is called Watchdog.
Yep.
It makes a lot of sense and is very valuable for anomaly detection because there's so many data points that are coming through all the time.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by anomaly detection in the context of Watchdog?
Certainly. So if you're looking at all the metrics that are coming through, you're going to have things that are maybe like latency metrics or maybe number of actions a customer is taking or the user is taking within a customer's product.
Yep.
And whenever that gets out of the normal, spiking in latency, maybe a change to some other metrics that you're using to measure performance, you want to know that usually quickly.
Right.
And unless you have a monitor that you explicitly kind of created for looking exactly out like that, you might not know.
Right.
And there's just so much data coming through between logs, metrics, traces, et cetera, that it's really nice to have some, automated system that goes, hey, by the way, this looks kind of weird. You should go take a look.
Right.
And one of the things we found is that there's a lot of value in doing that, but you have to be very careful about how many of those things you show at the same time and how much you show on the application. So we've started to, one of the things we kind of learned over this time is we need to dial down the number of, various notifications you get about these things and really dial up the precision of when we do actually surface something to you. And the second part of this is related to the agent's work is we should probably figure out how to make that actionable. Mm-hmm. So it shouldn't just be FYI. It should be, there's something going wrong here.
Right.
Maybe faulty change or any number of things. Let's put that through an agent that might tell you, hey, let's take an action on it, or let's roll it back, or or an agent that can reach out to you where you work on Slack, or Teams, or whatever tools that you're using. So you don't have to go to the page, go to Datadog, notice it sitting on the page in notifications. So I wouldn't say it's exactly killing an AI project, but I would say it is learning AI UX patterns that work and ones that don't.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Speaking of things that do and don't work, I think one of the things a lot of people have seen in the industry is that with the underlying technologies improving so fast, right? Obviously, the foundation models are getting a lot better, but there's actually quite a lot of other stuff that's getting a lot better in the meantime as well. The embeddings models are getting better. The set of things that you can do, the set of things that you cannot do with the technology changes over time. And when you're building a system like the one that you're describing of a like AI incident manager, let's say, some of those things you can kind of engineer around today, but maybe 6 months from now, the foundation models will get so much better that you didn't need to engineer around that. How do you think about the sort of strategy of what you build and how you build it in the context of just this like exponentially improving like, base layer?
Are you aware of like the bitter lesson?
I'm not actually. I would love to.
So the bitter lesson is this concept that you can keep kind of getting improvements out of a model by doing more special tweaks and more special, more sophisticated maybe architectures.
Right.
But realistically, the thing that will probably do better faster over time is just going to be, more compute, more data, a variety of other things like that.
Right.
There's an analogous kind of version of this, I think, for AI applications and agents.
Right.
Where I expect that much of the off-the-shelf models that foundation model companies are making will continue to just keep getting better and better and better. And so you shouldn't be sitting there writing like a ton of very specialized code to eke out just a little bit more improvement on your current system. Instead, you should make sure that your system is able to be evaluated quickly, swap out these kind of foundation models, and know as new models come out, you can try them out quickly and say, hey, are they getting better at particular tasks? And have a variety of subtasks that you can test them out on. So today, maybe it doesn't do an incredible job with looking at all this data that comes back from logs and traces and correlating them. And maybe you had to write a small special tool to do that. But you should always be testing and say, okay, tomorrow this model actually does a better job than my tool. Let's swap it in. And just have that, build that muscle for knowing how to test new models that are coming out, because Datadog, other companies like us, we're not going to be the one that build the best LLM in the world or whatever is going to come after LLMs. But we are the ones that have this data that they don't have. We have the applications and the users that need to interact with it. But we need to be able to swap those models in and partner with those companies.
Super interesting. And are you guys kind of taking a multi-model approach where you're working with multiple different foundation model providers? Are you kind of focusing in and getting a great deal of expertise in like one set of or one family of models? How do you approach that?
We work on staying flexible. We are a multi-model approach.
Cool.
And then we do also love open source models because those can be fine-tuned. And we try to use the right model for the right task. And the most important thing for us is building out the evaluation sets and having that data pipeline and process. And then we'll try it out against, Anthropic, OpenAI, maybe Mistral, maybe Llama, like whatever is coming out. We'll check them out. And we've moved between providers for certain things before. Code gen models, we were using almost entirely OpenAI models for a while. And then Anthropic kind of came out of nowhere. I wouldn't say out of nowhere, but they, kept getting better at the code gen side of things. And we started using them for a wide variety of tasks that we were using for the code gen, even though we're still using a lot of OpenAI models for a variety of other reasoning tasks. And we're trying out fine-tuning Llama more. We're trying out anyone else that kind of pops up with something that looks very relevant to the tasks we have.
Super, super interesting. Obviously, we've talked a lot about evals. The AI industry has a ton of players that describe themselves as like LLM evals, right? Datadog obviously does observability as its like core product. Do you see sort of observability for LLM applications as being in any meaningful sense different from observability for traditional software? And if so, like how have you guys approached that observability component? Is it all in Datadog? Do you use any of these like LLM evals tools? Did you build anything custom to do evals for your AI systems? Like curious how you guys approach that.
Yeah, I think there's two different parts of this question here. So one of them is the runtime observability. For LLM observability, we actually do have a product called LLM-as-judge.
Cool.
Not a very creative name, but it makes sense.
It's very clear, so that's something.
And that's meant to be used in conjunction with the rest of our product.
Nice.
And the main reason why we felt that there was a slice that needed a different view and a slightly different set of data and a slightly different way of interacting with it is that many people building LLM applications are making calls to these black box models.
Yep.
So really, they want to be able to look at the input and output of that.
Yep.
And they might want to see things like how much money are they spending on OpenAI? How much money are they spending elsewhere, right?
Yep.
How many tokens are they using? What kind of latency are they looking like?
Yep.
And so we allow you to kind of get a view into that and split it up. And then we also, because of the kind of stochastic nature of these systems, like the fact that you really kind of want to look at things in clusters and like large chunks of data. We also make it super easy to cluster, where are errors that came back from the model, where are there times where you couldn't quite respond to what the customer wanted.
Yep.
And these were all a little different than what we've had to do for the rest of our traditional system, the rest of our software observability system. But it's just kind of one piece that sits alongside the rest of the Datadog applications.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. So tell me a little bit about that sort of clustering that you're talking about. So let's say you have an LLM application running, it's answering a bunch of questions, maybe 1 in 3 times it like doesn't know how to answer or doesn't know how to respond. Like how does Datadog, how do you think about providing the end user or the developer the visibility that they need in order to be able to like not just see what went wrong, but actually go the extra step of being like, okay, these are the changes I need to make in my LLM application in order to improve it?
Right now, the first part that we have is we have clusters of types of queries and the answers.
Right.
And one of the things we can do is we can tell you when, by running a secondary model on top of this, we can tell you when users might have been frustrated. If it's a user interaction, they're not all user interactions. We can tell you when maybe the model came back with a null answer, like it just couldn't answer a question.
Yep, makes sense.
And we can tell you, we can group certain like sentiments. We can group other types of things like, hey, easy ones are your system is set up for English and you got a bunch of queries in Japanese, right?
Right.
Things like that will then let you take that next step and kind of take a trace through your system because it connects to the rest of Datadog.
Yeah.
You can go and click through and go and view the trace for the rest of the system and say, what else was happening that led up to this point?
Yeah, totally.
And that's the part where I think of as like helping them then take an action.
Yep.
Is giving them the right observability throughout their entire system that they can then decide what they want to do to fix that problem and if they want to fix that problem.
Yeah, totally. When will AI replace your job?
Soon, I hope. We'll see. I'm not quite a proponent of the 2027, the AI 2027 books that came out. But I am pretty bullish. I think that we're seeing a lot of improvements every year. I think it's not just engineers who will be replaced over time. I certainly think management is pretty ripe to be replaced. So maybe in the next few years, we'll see.
I'm curious if you view the distance between, whatever is missing from AI 2027 and today as a research problem, an engineering problem, just like, an economic problem of like, how do we get enough energy to like power the data and compute? Like, where do you think we are actually on what we need?
I think there's still a lot of research left.
Right.
I'm not quite at the like Jan LeCun level of like what you have today will never work.
Right.
But I do think that there's a substantial amount of improvements we'll keep getting out of the current systems.
Right.
But there also is a lot of research to be done to get to the level of, call it human intelligence or super intelligence beyond us. And it's not just unhobbling. It's actually probably architectural changes and improvements, things like memory improvements, things like actually being able to kind of have a long horizon of reasoning and context and all these things that you can't do with today's models. I think there's a lot that we will get out of today's models, and I think with more compute and the existing models, there are tons and tons of jobs that can be improved. People can be augmented. Many kind of low-hanging fruit things can be automated.
Right.
But that's like junior employee level, not run a company kind of level.
Right. And so one of the things that I'm always interested in for this question is like, okay, well, I think it's pretty clear that we can't like delegate an AI like run Datadog, that it would obviously not go very well. But I think one of the things that's not clear is why not actually. Like, is it that the models are not smart enough? Is it that we just haven't built enough tools that humans have access to? What actually is the problem? Why, what are the main bottlenecks on like AI actually becoming more valuable at the enterprise from your perspective?
I mean, I think a lot of it is still the reasoning ability. It has a pretty limited window that kind of thinks over.
You mean the
these
context
models.
window?
Context window plus just the ability to kind of carry information over and
Right.
kind of reason long term.
Right.
Right. Like if you were, not that it's anywhere near level of intelligence of like of a human or anything like that, but if you're just kind of spun up to work on a project for 2 minutes at a time, how much would you actually be able to make progress against?
Right.
You're like, hey, reset, come back, work on this new project, reset, come back and work on this new project. There is this kind of missing long-term reasoning and memory ability.
Right.
Not to mention that there's just a pure like intelligence aspect that needs to keep improving, and I don't really know how to quantify that myself.
Yeah. I always find this kind of interesting because like in some ways it's obvious to me that the models are already like so much smarter than I am, right? Like I recently was using models to learn. I had like a random like desire to go learn about history, and decided to figure out how did the last like 10 random civilizations, and I was like, teach me about how these civilizations collapsed and why. And it was just so expert. And I spent a good amount, in fact, it was so good that I was kind of suspicious that like it was hallucinating the information because the narrative was so compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'd go away and do a bunch of research, like validate, and lo and behold, like it was actually giving me a very, very reasonable, like accurate depiction of what actually happened. And I think it's clear that in so many ways, these are such massively general intelligence. I can use it to teach me about the collapse of the Mongolian Empire, but I can also use it to teach me how to make a better chicken curry than I can make, right? And that sort of general intelligence is very clearly present. And yet it still seems like a very, very difficult stretch to say these are like more intelligent than humans, even though obviously it does have a lot more intelligence than me in so many different domains. So I'm curious, like, whether you view that sort of as an indication that these agents, these AI systems don't reason in the same way that humans do, or whether you think it's just like, actually they reason in more or less the same ways as humans. We just like haven't filled in the data for like all the things that they need to reason about.
I suspect they don't reason quite like us, right? I'm not a human intelligence expert, but I certainly think there's a lot of things that are kind of obvious for us that are not for them.
What's some examples of that?
Recently, I was making a coloring book for my kid. Cool. I have a toddler.
Cool. Congrats.
Thanks. Yeah, I made the smart choice of having a kid when I was doing my startup. I don't recommend that to anyone.
I also made that very bad mistake, but to be honest, it wasn't a mistake. It's been great, but it's a lot of work.
Never a mistake, but it is a lot of lost sleep. But I was making him a custom coloring book.
Nice.
And one of the things I would do is I'd feed a bunch of pictures in of him, and I'd get back these kind of cartoon pictures and I asked Foro to turn it into like a cartoony coloring book thing. I was like, okay, awesome. Did it. Killer. It's really good at that. And then I asked a very simple one, which was, okay, we're going to actually make this a color by numbers.
Yep.
And couldn't get the concept of color by numbers. I described it multiple times. It would put numbers all over the place, but it would give, my son's forehead the same color as a grass bush. Wow. And he doesn't have a green forehead most of the time, and anything provided. And that kind of thing is like, it's very simple to describe to a person. But was surprisingly hard to get the model to get to grok. And like, I actually wasn't able to in the end. I ended up publishing, printing this coloring book for my son, but I left out all the color by numbers. I can write an algorithm that does that faster than getting this model to do it.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. I wonder, I think the sort of visual modality and the audio modalities are still quite new for these models, right? They're still quite early to that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure I remember like Ilya talking about like a similar-ish problem. And he was reasonably hopeful that like as we go down the sort of road of like getting more multimodal data, in this case it's like visual data, right? That some of these holes will begin to plug in. But I think you're exactly right to say it's still early and we don't really know where the research is going to take us. So exciting moments. My second silly question is, and it's kind of the same question as before, right? What year will we get AGI in?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I feel like I've been working in this field for 15 years. I've seen maybe 1 or 2 AI winters. I don't think we're anywhere near hitting a wall right now. But I think if we define AGI as human level or super intelligence, I think I'm probably still somewhere in the middle of like, I'm not terribly optimistic, but I also don't think it's necessarily impossible.
Interesting.
I'd say it's probably still to my own planning point of view. I think we'll have a lot of capabilities that can automate a substantial amount of work.
Yeah.
But I don't think we'll have quite like human level intelligence within the decade. I think we still are a ways out from that. I think we're missing a few. I think John Carmack talks about like 1 or 2 tricks that we're missing.
Right.
I would say we haven't found those yet in the research field.
Super, super interesting. I'm curious if, your perspective on that, like, does that change if, obviously there's a ton of investment, a ton of funding going into AI, a ton of engineers who are like now explicitly saying like, hey, I just want to work in the AI field. Like, do you think that accelerates our ability to find those like tricks? Or do you think fundamentally there's just some kind of like time constraint on the tricks that like is really hard for humans to move by like reorganizing ourselves?
I think it does accelerate it. That's why I think that it's even possible in the next, decade or so. I think, graduate student dissent is completely reasonable and something that we will have armies of people who are going after it. And we have, incredible companies going after it with tons and tons of money. And I think, we have a ton of geniuses who are going to figure out the next set of tricks that we need. And we'll see substantial improvements to what we have today. But I don't, and I'm not a researcher. I have, I'm a applied type person. I have not yet seen promise that will get us there yet.
I mean, I think one of the things that's often discussed in the industry of like non-researchers is the sense of slowing down of the improvement of the models. And, you saw recently last week, I think it was, OpenAI deprecated GPT 4.5, right? And that was, in some circles, taken as a sign that the scaling laws were starting to fail us in terms of the reasoning capabilities of the models. Like the sort of raw horsepower or IQ of the models were starting to hit a cap of what you could achieve from just raw scaling. Does that ring true to you? Having worked on this for 15 years, are you seeing like the rate of progress that we were seeing in like 2022, 2023, does that still feel like the rate of progress that you're experiencing today? Or do you agree with the sort of sentiment that's kind of in the ether a little bit of there's a slowing down that's happening?
I don't think there's much slowing down right now.
Interesting.
I think we're still seeing a lot of big improvements. I just don't think we're going to, I think there's still only so much runway left. Before we need another large breakthrough. But we certainly haven't hit the wall. But people were talking about this like 6 months ago as like, hey, we hit the wall, scaling's not working. But we've had a lot of big improvements recently. Plus, we've seen Anthropic play Pokemon. So I think that's a big enough indicator that we're still in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. That was definitely like a personal favorite. I have noticed like context windows are getting crazy long now, getting million token context windows. I've noticed a lot of improvements in the Google models in particular, which I think Google was like very slow out of the gate, like, shipping some of this stuff. But I'm beginning to see a lot more appetite from our customers as well of like using those models and finding use cases where Google is actually, the Gemini models are able to do things that the other models are still struggling with. So the new entrance to the field and the increasing number of like model providers is also like a pretty good omen, I think, for the like continued progress.
Certainly. I mean, and Gemini has been looking good. Huge context windows, which is nice. And I do think like each of the players are kind of keeping costs down, which is great by how many of them being in the market. But they're also pushing each other to keep delivering. So true.
Okay, awesome. And then last question before we round up. What are you most excited for in the future of AI? What are the use cases? What are the sort of benefits to humanity ultimately that you expect to see in the next like kind of 5-10 years that you're most enthusiastic about?
I think a lot of it is getting rid of the rote work that's out there. We want to be able to, let anyone go and build a company if they want to, without having to have backing only from VC, without having to have a particular pedigree, without having to have 1,000 people in the company. You got an idea, go try it out. It's kind of an explosion of creativity and agency that will be allowed by the agents and AIs.
Yeah, really, really cool. I'm curious, like, how do you see that influencing, like, sort of the nature of the enterprise? If it's so easy to have an idea and create one, do you expect enterprises to get smaller over time, like large companies with, billions of dollars of annual revenue? Do you expect to be able to see a world where those companies can exist with like 100 employees instead of like thousands?
Absolutely. I think eventually, I'm pretty aligned with, I think it was Sam Altman said that he expects the 10-person billion-dollar companies, right?
Wow.
And I think that definitely becomes easier and easier every day.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Diamond. This was really, really fun. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Bye.